Identity crisis seems to be all the rage these days. Just recently I was watching this video where the creators of Hello Kitty claimed that she is actually a Londoner girl and not a cat. I mean, excuse me, it's right there in the name. Hello Kitty. The last time I checked, kitty equals cat. And I find myself in a similar conundrum even with this car. It's called the Curvv. But where are the curves? It's as sharp as the accent of a Londoner girl. In fact, even the wheel arches, they seem like they've been designed by my geometry teacher. There are so many creases on the car, including one even on the C-pillar. So come on, it's right there in the name, Curvv. But where are they? The only curvaceous elements on this car are the wheels. And let's face it, no one is reinventing those anytime soon. But speaking of reinvention, car makers are constantly reinventing the body styles to keep the excitement alive, and Tata is now joining that bandwagon. So let's set aside all my quibbles and celebrate the fact that today we are able to buy a body style that up until now cost luxury car money. Say hello then, welcome then, the new EV, which calls itself the Curvv but identifies itself as a sharp coupe crossover. Coupe crossovers aren't exactly the Miss Universe contestants of the automotive world, yet cars like the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe or the BMW X6 are a few generations old now, proving that there is an audience for this body style. Tata bringing this body style to the sub 30 lakh rupees segment is quite an achievement. So why hasn't anyone else done these coupe crossovers in this particular price bracket? But not for long. The Citroën Basalt came hot on its heels and at a significantly cheaper price tag despite that slightly more compact body. And Tata's former design guru Pratap Bose has now carried this accessible coupe crossover magic over to Mahindra, where they are also busy preparing a slew of new models in this body style. So will Tata and Mahindra finally turn this body style into a common sight on Indian roads? Only time will tell. What I can tell you is, despite drawing styling cues from the sub 4 meter Nexon, this 4.3 meter long Curvv sits on an all-new platform, tall and proud. And Tata is going with the EV first to gauge how the market responds to this coupe crossover body style. And once the design theme is established, the petrol and the diesel counterparts will follow, which is not too far into the future. Now, there are subtle differences between the internal combustion and the electric versions, especially in the ground clearance and the approach angles, because you see there are big batteries in the floor. With a longer wheelbase than the Nexon, it also manages to pack in a lot more batteries into the floor. 45 to 55 kilowatt-hour batteries nestled within the floor, which also make this a long-range EV, despite not being a really long car.
Now, while Rohit says that the Curvv isn't long, space is not compromised. You get a powered boot lid, it's a segment first, but then you'll see that you have a massive 500-litre boot. And the good thing about it is that the opening is wide, it's also quite deep. And as you just see, the loading lip isn't very high at all.
That boot space trumps the likes of the XEV 700, even the Toyota Hyryder Hybrid, because again, that hybrid is eating into that boot space, right? However, with this coupe roofline, it means that anyone who is taller than 5'11" is going to have to practice their ducking skills. Now, in terms of the space, knee room, pretty decent, foot space also quite good, but because of the batteries in the floor, you sit in a bit of a knees up position and that compromises your under thigh support. Adjustable under thigh support like the one that we saw in the Citroën Basalt, that could have been a nice touch, but that's a segment exclusive for that car. What is a nice touch, however, is adjustable recline, two-step adjustable recline, so you can find a comfortable spot if you want something upright or something more relaxed. So in terms of the contouring, in terms of the overall seating comfort, it is pretty decent. Now, if you're going to be tall, the headroom will be a bit of a compromise, but you have a panoramic sunroof, so that makes it all feel quite airy. So as long as you're under 6 feet tall, you're not going to feel like a canned sardine, and once you leave this open, the cabin has a lot of natural light filling in, and it's a nice place to be in. The luxuries for the rear seat are AC vents and a fast USB-C slot, but hardly any storage in the door pockets and plasticky handles and switches.
But be warned, hitting a pothole or zipping over speed bumps will have taller passengers testing the integrity of the headliner, especially if you have a more spirited driver like Rohit driving from behind the wheel.
The Curvv is primarily aimed at nuclear families, or at least families that don't want grumpy people like that in the backseat always complaining about space. The real party actually is in the front. Both the front seats are ventilated. You also get this 10.2-inch instrumentation screen to add that tech-savvy edge. You also get a 12.3-inch infotainment screen that just looks like a home theater. Minus the popcorn, of course, but you can, however, get a portable coffee maker if you so wish from Tata's accessory catalog. And the system is mated to a 9-speaker JBL audio that really creates that surround sound experience. But if you have kids or people identifying to be kids sleeping in the back, then you also have a mode that says as much, kids sleeping in the back. So what that essentially does is only plays music through the front speakers so that they can continue to have their sleep and you can continue to have your entertainment. Now, whether you make coffee in this or get a takeaway, there's no space to keep that coffee really because there are no cup holders. Nothing here in the center console. You'll probably have to keep this bit open and maybe try and plonk it in there, but it's going to spill all over. Even the door pockets have the space at an angle, so the cups are not going there, only bottles can go in there. So that is a bit of a missed opportunity. Funnily enough, the cover for the glove compartment has two indentations that look like two shallow cup holders or can holders, so maybe you can use this like a tray when you're not on the move. You also get a pen holder and I think a card holder, whatever, some indentations here, and that tiger motif right there, something that we've seen with other Tata cars as well. Visibility outside of this swooping rear windscreen isn't too bad from the inside rearview mirror. And you have a plethora of ADAS features to keep you worry-free when you're out on the road. The forward collision warning or the emergency brake assist aren't too intrusive and seem to understand our traffic situation quite well, including the fabled cows on the road, which is frequent in Rajasthan. What should have been a little more alert though is the blind spot warning system. Tata is confident about getting another 5-star safety rating with the Curvv, and the safety extends beyond just the features. In your daily use, the ADAS and the blind spot assistant that we spoke of and the 360-degree cameras are going to be your most used safety features, apart from, of course, the 4 disc brakes. Now you get a 360-degree camera, absolutely helpful when you are in tight parking spaces. It even gets you that 3D mode and all of that. But the turning radius is still pretty tight. Even on a wide road like this, you still have to make a proper 3-point turn. And in even tighter spaces, it shows itself even more. In terms of visibility, it's a high beltline as you can see from the outside, and then you have that swooping A-pillar. And that does rob into a bit of your cornering visibility. Especially if you're a shorter driver, you are going to feel that this part is a bit too broad and that cornering visibility is going to feel a bit compromised. Now in terms of the driving posture, you don't necessarily get that commanding view of the road. It still feels more car-like to drive, and that's not because the car is low or anything. It is pretty tall, but it's also because how tall the dashboard elements are, and that is what makes it feel more hatchback-like or car-like to drive. Now some of you may complain about that if I'm spending this kind of money, why don't I get that SUV feel? Well, honestly, I quite like it. It looks sporty on the outside, and then with this kind of a high-rise dashboard and everything, it feels like it's all wrapping around you and it gives you that sense of sportiness yet again. So I quite like it. Getting a judgment of the 4 corners is easy, but the A-pillar blind spot can become unnerving in congested cities. There is a faint sound that the Curvv plays to warn other motorists. Take a listen. Because otherwise, this is a silent EV. But I didn't see anyone noticing this tune. It certainly prevents the cabin occupants from feeling disoriented though, with all that silence. But you can always amp up the music from those JBL speakers. I'm on an open road and I'm going to demonstrate a bit of a flaw here. Do not choose the accessory mats that come with the Curvv, because you see the accelerator pedal is very tiny and it tends to get stuck in those. Let me show you. There, it's stuck. It's stuck. My foot is off and it's stuck. When we talk about brakes, the regenerative braking is really on point depending on the modes that you're driving in. At the same time, the physical brakes are also quite nice. You may not necessarily notice the handover points between the physical brakes and the regenerative braking, etc. But the brake pedal does need a firm push, especially when you're driving at triple-digit speeds. Irrespective of the driving modes that you are in, the steering feel is pretty heavy. It's not going to be as light as some of the other older Tata cars, or certainly not as light as the Koreans or the Japs that you have in this bracket. It does have that heavy nature to it. There is no dead at center feel or anything. I quite like the weight on it, but not everyone is going to appreciate that. Any driving enthusiast will certainly love this. Under braking, there's also a fair bit of nosedive, because you see this car is riding high. It is immediately noticeable when you see the car in action. It is a high rider of sorts because the suspension is on the squishier side. They have tried to engineer a really good ride quality with it. Why do I say they have tried to do it? Because, well, it works sometimes, it doesn't work sometimes. As long as the roads are smooth or partly undulated, it's fine. But when you get onto some really poor road surfaces, there is a lot of side-to-side movement. There's a lot of bouncy feel. It never gets bone jarring. So don't get me wrong, it never gets bone jarring. It absorbs all of those bumps quite nicely, but the chassis just moves around quite a bit. You just saw that, a tiny undulation and the entire vehicle just moved. If you didn't see that, that's all thanks to the image stabilization on the cameras. You're going to get 3 driving modes with this electric powertrain. You have the Eco, the City and the Sport. Now, Eco, as you would expect, is going to dull down responses, but it also makes the regenerative braking feel a lot sharper. In the City mode, the powertrain feels like it's breathing a lot better. It feels a little bit more free, but the regenerative braking is not going to feel as sharp, which is a very good thing, because you don't want that sudden deceleration. You don't want the sudden braking. It can become unnerving, and it can also take other motorists off guard, and you don't want anyone rear-ending you. Now, Sport mode. You've often heard us say that electric cars, instantaneous power, instantaneous torque. And if this is going to be your first electric car, you want to experience some of that. And Tata has ensured that you do experience that. But I think they've gone a little bit overboard with that sport mode tuning, because you see it gets into these wheel spins quite often. And I'm not talking about only while getting off the mark. It's also at part throttle. It's also sometimes when you're just giving it that roll-on acceleration to pull an overtake or pull yourself out of a curve, etc. And there you don't want that unnerving wheel spin to come in, because it just leads to understeer as well. A little bit of gravel or maybe even concrete roads, it wheel spins quite often, so it can get overwhelming for a few.
The excessive wheel spin could also be down to the low friction tires chosen to maximize range despite their broad profile. Speaking of range, our 90-kilometer drive included 25 kilometers of highway cruising at 100 to 120 kilometers an hour and 65 kilometers of city driving at speeds between 5 to 55 kilometers an hour depending on the flow of traffic. We depleted around 30% of charge in this distance with an average energy consumption of 166 watt-hour per kilometer, or 6 kilometers per kilowatt-hour for easy calculation, which is right up there with the likes of the more expensive Hyundai Ioniq 5. A real-world range of 350 kilometers, if not better, seems easily achievable with the Curvv, and that's with the bigger battery variant, but that is a big plus.
Now the powertrain. Absolutely on point. It definitely feels like an evolution of the powertrain that we've experienced with the Nexon EV. The acceleration is a lot crisper. You know there is a lot more power with this. And even in terms of the way it is using all the energy from the batteries, it definitely feels a lot more efficient. Of course, the Nexon also was already showing improvement over the first Nexon EV that came out. But here, the powertrain, you know it's a new generation. You know that it's moved into the next step when it comes to the technology, when it comes to the battery management and all of that. The battery consumption seems a lot lesser compared to the Nexon.
Now let's talk about that identity crisis that we began with. This is a premium offering at the price at which it comes. It goes up against the likes of the Hyundai Creta, the Kia Seltos, Tata's own Nexon top-end variants, etc. But for this price point, not having enough storage spaces inside the cabin just robs that premium feel. So it's all down to to whether or not you like the coupe crossover design. If you love it, everything else is sorted. The powertrain is excellent, the car is pretty good to drive, and it's a relatively long-range EV at that, making the Curvv an excellent proposition.
So while the Curvv doesn't feel like an all-new platform to me, there are still a few rough edges here and there. I still quite like the direction that Tata is headed in, or where the entire electric space for Tata is headed in. The powertrain definitely feels like an evolution. I quite like the way it is delivering power. I quite like the kind of range that it is promising, at least on paper and with the first drive that we have right now. And more than that, I also like the promise that this new attitude brings to the table, because with a coupe crossover in this price bracket, it just shows that Tata is thinking fresh. They are not just sticking to the traditional powertrains, they are not just sticking to the traditional body styles, they want to do something more. I hope they do something like a convertible. I hope they do even bigger coupe crossovers for people who like this kind of a body style. I hope that they experiment a lot more in different price brackets, in different body styles, in different powertrains, etc. And that willingness begins from here. And that's something that I like. That promise is something that I definitely like. Should you choose this over an Nexon? If you need more space, if you need something that looks sportier, absolutely yes. I mean, in terms of the features, the space, the way it looks, the way it performs, the kind of batteries it brings to the table, or even in the ICE counterparts, the kind of power that it is now promising with the GDI and all of that, I think the Curvv is definitely a worthy upgrade if you already have a Nexon or you want to think about the Curvv instead of the Nexon. Should you consider it to the other existing products in the market? Well, I think they've positioned it quite well. It's priced quite well. In terms of the features, it is definitely right up there with the Koreans. So I think even those bases are quite well covered. So it's definitely a convincing product. It's definitely been worth the wait. Now, how the market reacts to this body style is something that remains to be seen. But I won't be surprised if it becomes another big ticket product like the Punch and the Nexon.